many of your extraordinary group of contemporaries whose every sentence carries their energy and DNA, your Ian McEwan's presence in your novels is often a matter of humour or an underlying comedy, even more than humour, that allows your reader a relationship with you. And I'm fascinated in this book how you do have a narrator who is as wise and generous as the characters are innocent and desperately naive. And I'm wondering how you found that tone for this book.
I messed around a long time trying to get the voice of this absent narrator. It's almost as if this narrator sort of knows them and actually plays some part in their lives. And I came up with a set of, almost like a message to myself. I thought, he's got to be all-seeing, so he's going to be an old-fashioned 19th century omniscient narrator with complete and free access to the minds of both the lovers. He must know their inner thoughts in the way that only a god could know an inner thought. He's also got to be wry, because this is a terrible thing. It's a painful, embarrassing thing. First sex, especially this first sex, when it fails so miserably. So a certain kind of wryness and warmth there, and forgiving, and he's got to know the future. Even at the beginning, he's got to have a sense of knowing the future. So that took me ages to get that. I kept starting it beyond that first sentence and not quite getting this voice, this person who's telling the story. But it's true, he is an important character.
And at what point did Edward and Florence emerge for you when you were creating it? Did you start with her? Because what I want to know about her is, and I guess it's what I also want to know about you, because it's about your relationship with classical music and the way that you use music in your work, as if it is the kind of it's loaded with an existential kind of weight that rock and roll isn't.
Well, no, I would give the weight to rock and roll as well. I love classical music, and I am of that generation. You know, I was 20 in 1968, so that places me in relation to rock and roll. But here I decided that I would give them separate music tastes, and that their music would be part of their mutual incomprehension. So I made her the leader of a string quartet, and she's a dedicated 5 hours a day practicing sort of girl, deeply serious, filled with ambition for her quartet, specializing in Beethoven and Mozart and Schubert, loving her work, loving the involvement. And curiously, even though she's a rather shy person, incapable of properly speaking her mind and always deferring, when she's working and she's taking charge of the rehearsals, she is filled out. She becomes a much richer, complete human being. Edward is one of those of his generation who started listening to electric blues coming from, which thrived in southern England. Well before the Beatles, there was another musical subculture. And when I said earlier, where did all those rock and roll guitarists come from? This is where they came from. Because American tastes had changed, there was quite a constant stream of American Chicago blues players coming to England, and a generation of players could be heard in the 100 Club and round Twickenham and the Cabbage Patch pub in West London. And out of this were players like John Mayall and Brian Jones. And so I gave him quite a serious involvement. As a student in UCL, which is in central London University, he hears and goes to the 100 Club. That's where he gets his musical education. It's that British kind of rock and roll that informed later on the Led Zeppelin and so on, that means something to him. He tries to listen to her string quartet and understand it. And he's in love with her. He loves watching her. He's a little jealous of the cellist. But when he sees the cellist, he realizes there's nothing to worry about. He sits in on the rehearsals. They're rehearsing a Mozart, the D major quintet, which actually starts with the cello. Dum, da, da, dum. And by the time they've rehearsed it all day long, he begins to think that whenever he's hearing it, he has heard it before. You know, the theme begins to embed itself in his mind. And he begins to be able to tell her that, yes, he could learn to love classical music, but in fact, it's gone. The next day, it's gone. And for him, classical music is just an undistinguished and indistinguishable mess of mewling and scraping and tooting. And I know lots of people feel that way about it. And he also notes that it has, in its faster movements, this air of prim agitation. When he tries to interest Florence in his music, he plays to her Chuck Berry. And maybe slightly thoughtlessly plays Roll Over Beethoven. And he knows from the words she uses about this. She's determined to like it. And she says, it's wonderful, it's so merry. And he said, no, it's not merry, it's so bouncy. And he knows also that it's a completely inappropriate response. And then she confesses that she cannot understand why such a simple song with only 3 chords and in common time, 4 beats to the bar, why does it need a drummer to keep time? And at that point they know he can never tell her why it needs a drummer. And it needs a drummer, it doesn't have a drummer. So in a way the music is the foretaste of what's going to happen, really.